Hello everyone. We are currently looking at week 7 of the class. It is about usability testing and about imrad reports. Now this video will say a little bit about usability testing for the first minute or two, but most of what this video covers is imrad style, and there is a lot to cover. More than any document you will write this semester for this class, imrad requires you to meet a number of different rhetorical moves. It's a very specific style of document and you're expected to do certain things at certain places within it. Please watch this video and take it into account when you are writing your own imrad report. So I'm going to say a little bit about usability testing. I have a longish statement of context about the usability. I do point out that the workload this week is fairly light. There are no major discussions, there are no major assignments. This is meant to give you time so you can write your SOP and you can set up the user test. This does involve some time. And I also want to quickly make a point of reiterating this idea. I urge you to take the usability testing seriously. Don't picture it as a loose activity in which you call some friends and just hang out while talking through your SOP. It is of course fine if you ask friends to test your document, but think of the activity as a literal scientific experiment requiring all the rigor that an experiment requires. I want to just quickly highlight this because it has tripped students up in the past. They have not taken usability testing particularly seriously, and it has shown in the final imrad report. If you are thinking of it as a scientific experiment, it adds a level of rigor to the testing activity that allows you to get better information. You should be collecting data during this test. You should be recording it. You should be thinking ahead about what specific things you're going to tell the user to do, about what questions you're going to ask in the exit interview, and about how the overall testing can be more successful. The more you think about this and the more you take it seriously, the better the imrad report tends to be. I have had issues in the past where students have not taken as seriously as they need to, and then when it comes to writing the report, they just don't have that much to say because they hadn't actually recorded the data. If it helps, picture yourself getting paid to record this data or to conduct this test on the usability of your SOP. So as we're heading into usability testing, let me just quickly point out these readings. They are all short, and there's this short little video from Google on usability testing. Please read all this stuff and get a feel for it. The video is particularly useful, and I should quickly point out that those of you that have a future in software development, please recognize that usability testing is a huge component of that. Google in particular is known for rigorous usability testing, and it is part of what has made them a successful company. So I am asking you to write a quick response on what it is required for a good usability test, and I am importantly asking you to submit a plan for your user test. Tell me who you are going to test, where it is going to take place, what data you will record, and what questions you will ask of the user. And also think about interferences. What will your position be as the test is taking place? Will you be talking to the person? Will you be in the room? Will you exit the room? What sorts of things might pollute the reliability of the test? For instance, if you were testing two people and one user is watching the other user run through the procedure, that obviously would cause problems. So try to think about this as an experiment, try to plan it out ahead of time, and think about the data that you will record. Now, the remainder of this video is going to be talking about imrad reports. We've got this imrad report we're going to be looking through. You have already read it. It is a surgical safety checklist by Haynes et al. We read this very early in the semester, and I'm going to turn to that and do a walkthrough of it while explaining some of the stylistic concerns and the rhetorical moves that they make. Before doing that, I want to quickly take a look at this graphic. It's out of a reading from Luciana et al. That we'll look at. It's not a particularly important reading, but there is a striking graphic here. This line graph is showing the prevalence of imrad style in 4 major medical journals. We've got the British Medical Association, British Medical Journal rather, Journal of the American Medical Association, Lancet, and New England Journal of Medicine. These 4 are making up probably the biggest names in all of medical publishing in the English language. And the striking thing about this graphic is that starting by the mid-80s, 100% of all articles published in these journals was written in imrad style. There is a reason for this. Imrad style is efficient. Doctors and scientists are busy people. They do not have time to go through articles that are written in sort of a random style. They want to get the information that matters, and imrad always has this structure that allows you to know where you're going to find the given information that you're looking for. So recognize that this is a absolutely dominant style of article in medical publishing, but also in lots of other areas of science as well. So let's talk about the structure. imrad, if we haven't been clear on that, stands for Introduction, Results, Methods, and Discussion. You will occasionally see synonyms used. For instance, here they're saying background. That essentially means introduction, and instead of discussion, they've used conclusions for their title in the abstract. That is a really common thing, but the style remains the same. So the introduction should make a set of moves that are 100% stable across the board on all imrad reports. There are 3 separate rhetorical moves. Here is what they are. The first one is to point out something that is important or that matters a great deal to people working within the field. Now, in this case, the thing that they point out is that surgical care happens constantly. There are 234 million operations performed annually. There are a lot of surgeries taking place. So that's where they're making the first move. They're saying surgery is a big part of how we conduct medicine. It is a very common occurrence. Then, move number 2, you point out a problem. You point out something that is wrong, something that is inefficient, something that isn't quite working right. Or in the context of research, some question that has not yet been answered. So here's where they do that. Although surgical care can prevent loss of life or limb, it is also associated with considerable risk of complications and death. And they go on to talk more about that, but that sentence right there kind of raises a problem that they are covering. They're saying, okay, surgery is very common, but there are these problems with it. Then the third move is to offer a solution, or at least part of a solution. Or if they have posed an unanswered question, this is where they would offer an answer to that question, or at least a step towards an answer. Here they're taking a step towards that. They're pointing out that the complications from surgery are preventable or avoidable, is the word they use. And then they get down here to point out that the WHO has published a set of guidelines for safe surgery. And right here, the last line, it bridges the page. On the basis of, let's get down to the next page, these guidelines, we designed a 19-item checklist intended to be globally applicable and to reduce the rate of major surgical complications. And there they're fulfilling the third move. They're saying here is a solution to this problem that we've just listed. Now, after you do that, and the introduction can be kind of short, you need to move on to a methods section, and this is where the researchers describe what they actually did. I want to quickly point out that they are using first-person active voice here. We conducted a prospective study of pre-intervention and post-intervention periods. I will leave it off there. You can feel free to use this active voice. Do not feel like you need to be stuck in passive voice the whole way through. Now, a quick note about methods for the sake of research that you might be doing in the future. When you are reading an imrad style article, the methods are quite often the section of the article that matters the least. If we're talking about somebody who's trying to get the meaning out of an article for a research project, reading through the methods section is often a little bit torturous because they can get extremely technical, and from a point of view of a student who's trying to do a research project, they may not matter all that much. Now, I'm not trying to say that they don't matter. In the big scheme of things, methods is how researchers convince other researchers that they've used good practices and that their data is reliable. But from the point of view of a student, sometimes I will openly tell students to kind of skim through or even skip the methods section, particularly if it gets into the section, and this article does have it, on statistics. I'm glad people know about statistics. They are an important part of how science is conducted, but it is worth noting that from the point of view of somebody who's doing research, the statistics section probably is not going to matter that much. Let's say a couple other things about the methods section. It will occasionally involve implicit justifications of choices. In other words, researchers will say something like, in order to protect against such and such contamination, or because we did not have access to such and such data, we compensated by doing such and such action. In other words, sometimes when they're reporting the data, they will include like small justifications for the choices that they made. And they will, you know, kind of try to say like why they made them and point out that they were useful choices. So I'm going to skip down to the results section to quickly wrap up the methods. Notice here's the statistics section I was talking about. Sometimes reading through that is perhaps not the most useful use of your time. The methods are written in this very, very straightforward, stripped down, literal style. Like there's not a lot of variety when it comes to the methods. You just say what you did. Results describe, well, the results of what the experiment was, but let me point out a couple of rhetorical concerns. So the results will quite often start with a super quick summary of what they talked about in the methods. Here they're talking about the patients that they enrolled in this, and then they immediately get into the results of their implementation of this checklist, pointing out that there was a dramatic decrease in complications, which is, you know, really amazing. It was an extraordinarily successful program that they implemented, and they're essentially talking about like the results of that, about how complication rates dropped. They have a big table that describes some of the drops that they saw in complications and the patients that experienced them. Another table here. Tables do play an important role in results in that a lot of the like nitty-gritty data is reported in these tables. Now, it is worth noting an important feature of results. You should not see the results section as a data dump in which you just list every single thing that happened or every single thing that you found. Instead, the data in a results section should be summarized, and it should be summarized strategically so that it points the reader towards understanding the significance of those results. So don't just, you know, list every single thing that happened. Instead, select the results that offer useful interpretation. In this case, they're focusing a lot on the results on reduced complications, and that's, you know, the important thing that they're trying to point out. They are not just going through and listing every single possible thing that they could point to as a result of this. It is worth noting all these little P's. That is a reference to a p-value. P-value of 0.05 is considered reliable, and you want a p-value that is, you know, lower. A lower p-value is considered better. I have read the definition of a p-value several times. I am not well equipped to explain it, and it's beyond the scope of this video. I just want you to understand what that is. When we're seeing this little p, it's a stats thing. They're essentially saying, okay, according to statistics, this is meant to be reliable results, or this is interpreted to be reliable. So the discussion section is probably the most rhetorically loaded section of an imrad report, and it starts off like the results will start off by quickly mentioning the methods. The discussion section starts off by quickly mentioning the results. Here they're sort of reiterating what they just barely said. Introduction of the WHO surgical safety checklist in operating rooms in 8 diverse hospitals was associated with marked improvements in surgical outcomes. Post-operative complications fell by 36% on average, and death rates fell by a similar amount. So they are starting off by saying, okay, quickly, here are the results that we just barely reported from this experiment. And then they start talking about why those results exist, and they're essentially discussing like what they mean. Here, this line near the end of this first paragraph in the discussion section, the reduction in the rates of death and complications suggests that the checklist program can improve the safety of surgical patients in diverse clinical and economic environments. And then they start talking about, after they've made that established point, like here's how it should be interpreted, they start trying to talk about some of the implications of it. And one thing they don't know is why the checklist works. Like there's some doubt as to what it is specifically about a checklist that allows it to function so well and to reduce the rates of complication in hospitals. And that discussion eventually leads them to a quick mention of what's called the Hawthorne effect. This is an effect from social sciences, essentially that people perform better when they know they are being observed, or they're more careful, and they're saying that perhaps the Hawthorne effect was responsible for this improvement in the performance of hospitals because hospital staff knew that they were being observed. But then they have this kind of backup statement. However, our analysis does show that the presence of study personnel in the operating room was not responsible for the change in the rate of complications. So that is them sort of saying, well, dismissing the Hawthorne effect to some degree. They're saying we don't think it was just the Hawthorne effect. Instead, we think it was, something else. So I point this out to highlight one of the steady moves that is involved in IMRAD reports, and that's where you consider complications, also sometimes called qualifiers, in your overall data and your overall results. So here at the end, they're kind of pointing out a number of things that were wrong with the study or that may have been wrong with the study. This Hawthorne effect is the first of them, where they're kind of saying hospital personnel may have behaved a little bit differently because they knew they were being observed. That leads them to this statement: this study has several limitations, and then they go on at great length and list all of those limitations. This is all about possible things that could have been wrong with the study. One danger of this design is confounding by secular trends, which means there might have just been like a random change that that did not involve the checklist. And they kind of talk about how they try to compensate for that. Here's another limitation: is that data collection was restricted to inpatient complications. The effective intervention on outpatient complications is not known. They're pointing out that they don't quite have that data, and they're talking about what that means for their study. And a lot of times this will be followed with a rebuttal that essentially says this does not undermine our overall study. We recognize it's a complication, or a possible limitation, but we still think our data is valid. Here's another one. One additional concern is how feasible the checklist intervention might be for other hospitals, and then they follow that with a rebuttal: implementation proved neither costly nor lengthy. It is a slightly strange form of argument here at the end of the discussion, because this is more or less the end of the paper, but they go through and they list every possible thing that could have been wrong, or that they might have screwed up on, or that they may not have accounted for, and then they sort of like rebut all that by saying, well, we don't think that was a problem because of such and such factor. What they're doing here is they're trying to show themselves to be careful thinkers, and they're trying to point out that they thought of the complications with their work before other people had to tell them about the complications in their work. It's a way of showing like a habit of caution that scientists often appreciate. They are pointing out like all of these potential flaws, and by doing so, they are sort of saying to the scientific community, we're careful, we're thoughtful, we thought about all this stuff before we put this out. Now I want to get right down to the very last paragraph. They sort of reiterate their main point of the overall article. So this is the final paragraph of the overall IMRAD report. They start by saying surgical complications are a considerable cause of death and disability around the world, and then they point out that their checklist had a dramatic effect on reducing the amount of these complications. And then I want to read the very last sentence and make a point of what they're doing. Applied on a global basis, this checklist program has the potential to prevent large numbers of deaths and disabling complications, although further study is needed to determine the precise mechanism and durability of the effect in specific settings. That is a stock line, but I don't mean to make it a throwaway line. It is something you will see again and again at the end of a report. It is a look forward. Further study is needed to determine the precise mechanism, durability of the effect. That's something that researchers will quite often do for a couple of reasons. One of them is to sort of say, hey, all you other researchers out there in the scientific community, if you want a problem to tackle, here it is. Like, we're kind of serving this up as a question that remains unanswered. And it's true that that is part of the intention of this line. But there is another slightly more cynical interpretation, and that is that they are saying to their funding agencies, we still have valuable work to do. We are not done with this work. Please keep the funding dollars rolling, because we've got another study planned. We've got unanswered questions, and we're going to put your money to good use in the future trying to answer those questions. I am asking you to make this move at the end of your imrad report, and it's worth noting that this move is also going to be a factor in the research review that we do later in the semester. It is a extremely common move at the end of an article. It's almost becomes like a sort of a stock, almost like cliched expected move, but it still has a valuable function. Researchers will pretty much always end by saying, here are things that we still don't know. So please make sure that you are doing something like this at the end of your imrad report. You should end by saying, here's what we need to do in the future. A lot of times this will involve saying that there should be future testing of the SOP to make sure that it is effective. So in a nutshell, that's an imrad report. There is a document online that I want to point you to that might be helpful while you are building this. That document is on our Canvas page, and I'm realizing I haven't linked it for this week, and I really should. So I'll make a point of linking it on this page, but let me show you where you can also find it. So if I go up to Files, and then I go to Additional Materials Covered in Class, it's going to be this one, Framework Outline for the imrad report. So this document kind of like makes all of, or has little descriptions of all these moves. We had something similar when you were writing the proposal. I'm asking you to look through this and make sure you're sort of following the lead that this document is trying to give. It goes through and talks about all the different rhetorical concerns of these different sections. Notice that there is a lot in the discussion. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen there. So please open up this document and read through it as you're writing your imrad report. And again, let me stress this line that I say on the page for this week. I should get to the pages if I scroll down to week 7. So I urge you to take the usability testing seriously. Like, really, think of it as an experiment, collect data, make it a serious endeavor. If you're not doing that, it becomes much harder to write like a solid report. If you have questions about any of this, please send me a message or send me an email, and I'll try to answer them. And please do not delay or procrastinate at this point. The usability testing takes some time. We have got to finish this project up. Shortly after fall break, we will be done with this project, and we will be moving on to the research project. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.